Hey, my lovesies, Vicky here, your host of Raw Chatter. I am talking about the stuff that really matters when it comes to how you feel about yourself. Yes, this week's episode is all about self worth. I'm also going to cover procrastination and perfectionism because they go very well together with feelings of low self worth. So, without further ado, shall we dive in? Self worth, what even is it? And is it different for everybody? Well, absolutely, it is. It's the value that you have for who you are. Now, here's the thing, the older that we get, the easier it is to understand that self worth has nothing to do with having a thigh gap, what the weight says on a scale, how big your clothes are, how many material possessions you own, what type of car you have, your monthly income, how good looking or not your partner is, or how beautiful you are. It's got nothing to do with any of those things. But when we are a young person, a young teen, or even pre-teen, sort of 10, 11 years old, when we're starting to be aware of who we are and how we look, and we've already been thrown into a world of comparisonitis through no choice of our own, but through social conditioning, then we start to really consider our own self-worth. And for many of us, depending on our background and depending on the type of schooling that we were with, the kind of people that our parents hang around with, the sort of programs we watched or films that we watched, and just what we were taught or learned about life in general, means that we will have picked up some perceptions, some interpretations of what self-worth actually means. And for every single one of us, it's different. And this is why I hate absolute definitions. So if you go and you Google what is the definition of, then you will come up with a definition of self-esteem and you'll come up with a definition of self-worth. But I think it's really important for me to stress that it's going to be different for everybody. But ultimately, it comes down to looking at your values and looking at what is important to you. But more importantly than that, what makes you feel good. Now, oftentimes, that's a tricky one because when we're young, we kind of don't necessarily know, in terms of how we are able to describe it, what feels good. We just know that we have experiences and moments in our lives that just bring us joy. And joy is a really tricky one to describe, isn't it? If somebody said to me, explain joy, it's really hard. For me, I feel that joy means I just can't stop smiling. That's what it is for me. I can't stop smiling. And it just makes me feel light, almost weightless, and that I have not a care in the world. That's what it feels like. That's what joy feels like to me. I couldn't care who's around. I don't care what my facial expression is. It's nothing to do with how I look, what clothes I'm wearing, what exercise I did that day, what I ate, or any of those things. But what we do is we put a lot of sway on what we think value and worth means. And our value as a person, we are taught from a young age, comes from achievements. And this is something that we need to really, really address. And I say it and I'll keep on saying it on these podcasts. If you are an aunt or a parent or a grandparent, or you're thinking of having children, I really want you to consider, what is the message that you are giving them about achievements? Because school teaches our kids that the better that they do, the more valuable they are. And that is just such a terrible message to give to anybody, because it's just not true. What's more important is, are you a caring person? Are you a kind person? Are you a person who has boundaries, who knows how to take care of themselves and doesn't allow themselves to be walked over or treated like a piece of shit on the bottom of somebody's shoe? That's what value is. Are you somebody who can contribute a different viewpoint and a different opinion because you have had a different life experience? and understand that it's nothing to do with right or wrong, but understand that we all have different life experiences, and therefore the value that we put on things has got to be different, because we will interpret things often in the same way that our parents interpret them. Why? Because that's what we pick up. Remember, from the age of being a little dot in your mummy's tummy, as your cells were reproducing and deciding to become a human being and attach to the walls of the uterus, there was information that was being passed through to you. There was trauma that was being passed through generations into those cells that you weren't even aware of. And we pick up what is going on when we are in our mummy's tummy, what she feels, the emotions that she has, the stress that she's under, the struggles that she's under, but also the joys and the happy times and how much sleep she's getting and the type of food that she's eating. All of that stuff will affect who we are and how we behave and how we think and how we feel. And often how babies are in the first few weeks of them being born is very much down to what was the experience like whilst they were being incubated, if you like. Because if there was a lot of trauma going on for your mom, then the chances are that that baby is not going to be a baby that wants to be let go of. It may be very attached. It may be a baby that cries a lot if you leave it. It might be a baby that wasn't fed in the womb the nutrients that it needed. So it may be that that baby never seems to be satisfied when it's being fed. There are a lot of things that when we look back in hindsight, we can kind of correlate. Now, I didn't know this stuff. I learned it on my journey to understanding that there was so much more to my eating disorders and my alcohol issues and how I felt about myself. And it wasn't just mental, it was physiological, it was chemical, it was partly genetic, but it was a lot to do with my environment and my upbringing. And what I knew was that my mum's pregnancy with me was very traumatic. Not that the actual pregnancy itself was traumatic, although she did have a lot of morning sickness and didn't want to eat very much. So that will have affected the nutrients that I was getting in the early days of my development. But also that her life was traumatic. My dad, in his wisdom, decided it would be a good time to move house and to expand his business. So there was a lot going on. And for a lot of the time, she was not feeling supported. She was not getting the support and the love and the kind of what she hoped and wanted from her partner. She already had my brother, who was a toddler, and she was struggling. But her partner wasn't around to help. And how does that make you feel when your partner's not there to help? It makes you feel not worthy. It makes you feel not cared for. It makes you feel very vulnerable, makes you feel very alone. And it makes you wonder, what's it all for? Now, she was fortunate that she did have a mum, but her mum was working hard. So she wasn't always there. And so a lot of the time, she just felt very lonely, very unloved, very depressed, very shattered, because my brother was full on. He was a great toddler, but he was always on the go. And so I knew that for me, she didn't have the best time. And there was so much worry about, would the house be ready? Would they be able to move in time before I was born? What if I was early? All of these things were going through her head because she had the time and the space on her own, because she wasn't having conversations with that many people. You can understand why when I came out, I cried a lot. And she didn't know what to do, and she couldn't breastfeed very well because she physically wasn't in a great space. All of those things contribute to the fact, and I didn't know it, that I had issues then with my gut bacteria, and I ended up being somebody who is very sensitive to certain foods, which are the very foods that I ate and then threw up when I was bulimic, but couldn't understand what was it about those foods that once I started, I couldn't stop. And it wasn't back then just the fact that it was all the really, really processed foods, because that wasn't the case. It was not always the processed foods that I went for. It was other foods too. But in hindsight, I now know that it went right back to that stuff. But my worth, even as a child, was very much as the girl talked about in terms of being pretty, being slim, looking the part, People knew who my family were. People knew who my dad was. He was very well known around the town because he was in Round Table. He did a lot for charities. Business was growing. He had shops. He had the cinema in the town centre. He was a guy who had properties and businesses and what have you. People knew who he was, which means that growing up, my brother and I were a little bit in the spotlight, which was horrific as a teenage because I couldn't get away with anything. Right? Even if he didn't know what I was up to, he would find out via a third or a fourth party at some point. And that meant that when I was really actively in my illness, it was really hard for me to get away with the stuff because he found out what I was doing, who I was with, and all that kind of stuff. But my worth was about me wanting to feel good in my own body. And I used comparisons a lot, and I did a lot of soul searching and asking why am I so different? Why did I have to be born with ginger hair? Why did I have freckles when all of my friends didn't? Why did all my friends have thighs that didn't rub together when they ran and stood up? Why did I have to be the one who looked different, who felt different? And why wasn't I the most intelligent? Because that's what I thought I needed to be worthwhile and valuable to my dad. His expectations and my interpretations of his expectations were gleaned through me listening and watching and learning from how he spoke to people and the comments that he made, for example, on sports shows that were on TV. And when you're hearing comments like, well, nobody remembers who came second, you always want to aim to be the top and the best. That was the message I heard loud and clear. My interpretation was second isn't good enough. So when I used to take exams at school, and if I got come second or worse, even third out of the class, I didn't want to tell him because I didn't know what reaction I was going to get. I wanted to be praised. I wanted to be recognized for working hard, for doing well. I didn't find academia easy. I did well, but it wasn't a doddle for me. I had to put in the hard yards. I had to put in the graft. And I still do. My memory now, because of all of my issues with alcohol and food, is not what it was by any stretch of the imagination. And so I have copious amounts of written notes. If anybody has seen me on a Zoom call in either of my offices, the rooms where I work, you'll see the walls are just full of post-it notes. And I'm looking up now because you can't see them on this screen, but on this wall in front of me here and on this wall to the side of me here, there is just big post-it notes, little post-it notes, stuff with highlighters on it, all kinds of things to remind me of the stuff that I just cannot latch onto. But I thought that I had to be perfect to be worth anything. I thought I had to be top of the class, and I wanted to be slimmer and fit in. I didn't want to be the slimmest. I knew that that was not going to happen. I was kind of savvy enough to recognize that I wasn't going to get any taller and that my rib cage and my hips were just bigger than my best friend, who was really tiny, but naturally so. And I knew that my actual body shape, my bone structure, I couldn't change. I got that. I understood that. But I wanted to be the person who had no jiggly bits. I didn't want my thighs to touch each other at all. I didn't want to be the one who was red-faced and red-skinned on bare legs when I went running. I didn't want to be ginger. To the extent that I clearly remember wishing that I'd been born with brown skin as opposed to my pasty white freckly skin. And I remember, and I was only about 7, grabbing my mum's foundation, which was ridiculously dark, far too dark for her, and putting it all over my body because I wanted to change the colour of my skin so that I'd look prettier. Now, I don't know if any of you who are listening can resonate with that, but that's how I felt even at a young age, that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't slim enough, that I didn't look right, I didn't have the right colour skin, I wasn't intelligent enough, and I had to be better to be worthwhile. I had to be more than I felt that I was. And working with the people that I do around issues with their weight and with body image and anxiety over finances and looks, these are all the things that still come up because we don't tend to change that belief system unless we actively start to be aware that we've got it, And then B, take responsibility for the fact that it's actually not ours. It's something that we picked up from other people. But along with this low self-worth was this idea that we also had to have the biggest house, have the most expensive cars. And this was something that my dad fell into, not recognizing until we had heart to hearts many, many years later when he was not very well with his own health issues. And unfortunately, believed the doctors and succumbed to their prescriptions of various medications, which should not have been taken together. And he should have been having some counseling and therapy, but he never was. However, that's an aside, but that's one of the main reasons why I'm so anti-medication unless it's absolutely necessary. Because when we had a heart to heart and I was explaining to him that I understood why he was driven so much, he didn't get it. And he certainly didn't understand the effect that it had on me. And when he did try and understand it, he was mortified. He was mortified that his behavior and his drive to want to be better than, to have more than, to have the biggest house, to not just keep up with the Joneses, but be the Joneses, even though he'd come from a very, very, very difficult financial background. He didn't realize that his father's business, his father died suddenly when he was only 21. And he actually wanted to be a maths teacher, but that dream went out of the window because he had to take over the business. And when he took it over, it was in a mess and he had no clue. And neither did any of the family, and he never told them. He hid it all. He paid back debts. He built the business from what it was into, it became a great big empire is perhaps a too big a word, but for him, it was something that he has very happily passed on to my brother. And my dad's no longer with us. He decided to take his life because of the medication that he was on and the effects it was having, and the fact that he couldn't have any surgery to help him to physically feel better. And so he was going to have to put up with the way that he was feeling, and he chose not to. And I have no ill feelings towards that at all. In fact, he almost asked my permission, and I was like, yeah, I get it. If that's what you want to do, then you're going to get no arguments from me. But the point is, he didn't understand what was driving him, and I didn't understand what was driving me. I just knew that we had this underlying belief that for us to feel good enough, we had to be better than, we had to be more than, we had to be perfect. And when somebody says that cliche, or somebody said it to me when I was little, perfect doesn't exist, I really wanted to just blow a raspberry at them, because yes, in my world, I believed that it did. And if I could reach that, then maybe I'd be valued. Maybe my dad would take notice. Maybe he would tell me that he loved me. Maybe he'd tell me I was good enough, because that's what I wanted to hear, but I never did. I never heard it until my own daughter was 14. And that's when I finally heard it. Now, that's a long time, right, to wait from being a young child to hear your father say that you are good enough and that he is proud of you. That's a long time to wait. And I'm going to invite you not to wait that long, because if I'd known then that self-worth and my value come from internally, I potentially would have had a different journey. In hindsight, I don't know what that would have been, but I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. So do I want a different journey? I don't know. The point is, perfect was something that was never attainable. And because it was never attainable, I sometimes took so long to make decisions on doing things that actually I missed out on enjoying life. And I don't know if you can resonate with that, but when you are so desperate to be perfect, it's really hard to make the decision about what is the next step to take to get you to perfect. And if you've got a couple of choices, it's hard. If you've got more than a couple of choices, it feels almost impossible. So we put it off. We put it off, or we ask somebody else, what do you think? And there is nothing more annoying than always being asked, what do you think? Now, I didn't realize how annoying that was. But part of perfectionism and procrastination means that you can't make decisions very well. You don't know what you want because you're wanting to do the perfect thing. And in your head, that means doing the perfect thing for the other person. Because if you're perfect in the eyes of the other person, then maybe then they'll value you. Maybe then your self-worth will go up. Maybe then they'll tell you that you are good enough. But actually, What that does make you is codependent. What it means is that you always need to be asking somebody else for their opinion. You can't make a decision on your own. And if you do, you don't trust it. You don't trust that it's the right thing. And for the clients that I work with, this is something that comes up so often, because their parents will poo-poo a decision that they maybe have made and the outcome wasn't what was expected. That's interpreted, therefore, as a wrong decision. Well, let me ask you to think about that differently. How about you had wrong expectations, that the decision was fine? It's just that your expectations were out of kilter with that decision. And if you'd have gone into that decision with different expectations, well, maybe that was exactly the right decision. You see, how we interpret things, our perception of what things mean and how they should pan out, again, is something that's picked up through our experiences of life, through watching, through listening, through taking on this social agenda and persona of what we think we should be to be worthy. And I want you to really take on board that worthy is nothing to do with how you look physically. It is nothing to do with how much money you earn, how many possessions you have, how big your house is. It's none of that. It's nothing to do with how many degrees you've got or what grade A levels or O levels you've got. Those are not the worth of you as a human being, as an individual. What is your worth is how do you feel about you inside? Are you living in alignment with your values? Are you living and thinking and doing and being a person who is creating joy in your life? Are you honoring and looking after the physical body that you are in so that you can actually enjoy experiences and make connections and be with people who help you to experience even more joy and even more experiences of life? Because experiencing life and feeling joyful, that's what self-worth is all about. And it is in your own hands. So I'm going to invite you to poo-poo social conditioning, to take no notice, let it wash over you when you are being compared to somebody else of a similar age. When you look at social media, just look through it with an attitude of, oh, that's interesting, rather than she's slimmer than me, she's more intelligent than me, she's got more money than me, or he has got a bigger car, or he's got a better looking boyfriend, or whatever it happens to be. Let go of comparison, let go of perfectionism. And what you'll find is you won't procrastinate. Decisions will be so much easier because you'll recognize there is no such thing as a right or wrong decision. There's just a decision that will have an outcome. And if you let go of the expectations, the socially conditioned expectations, the interpretations of the expectations that you've heard from somebody else, but if you just make a decision and allow yourself to enjoy the experience and be fully present and let go of any expectations at all, except to find joy in what you're doing, then I will tell you that is how you create self-worth. And you will have it. You will have the ability to tap into it. The question is, will you give yourself the permission to do so? I hope you do. We only have one life that we know of. We certainly only have one physical body. It's the only one you've got to live in. Look after it because it's looking after you. Have a lovely day. Whatever you do, you are worthy. You are deserving. Enjoy it. Experience joy and take care. Thanks for listening.